Look at this watch. Plain white dial, thin leather strap, no diamonds, no gold, no logo screaming for attention. You'd walk past it without blinking. You'd assume it belonged to an accountant or a retired school teacher. It sold at auction last year for $11.1 million. And the man who bought it? He wore it to breakfast the next morning without telling a single person what he'd paid. That's the story nobody talks about. Because while the internet obsesses over rappers stacking diamond-crusted Rolexes and influencers flexing AP Royal Oaks wrapped in baguette stones, the actual wealthiest people on Earth are doing something completely different, something quieter, something that most people completely misunderstand. They're wearing watches that look cheap and doing it deliberately. Welcome to the most expensive secret in the world. The watch that broke the internet without anyone noticing in 2019. A steel Patek Philippe reference 1518 sat quietly inside a Christie's auction house in Geneva. No flashy display, no celebrity endorsement. Just a small, modest timepiece that looked like something your grandfather might have worn to church. Bidding opened. Then it climbed. Then it kept climbing. Final price, $11.1 million for a steel sports watch that most people couldn't pick out of a lineup. The buyer remained anonymous. Of course. That same year, at the same auction, diamond-covered fashion watches from celebrity collections sold for a fraction of that price. Pieces that screamed luxury, pieces that made people gasp in showrooms, pieces that looked by every conventional measure far more expensive, and yet the quiet one won. This is not a coincidence. This is a philosophy. And once you understand it, you'll never look at a billionaire's wrist the same way again. What quiet luxury actually means there is a term that's been floating around fashion circles for decades, but has exploded into mainstream conversation recently. Quiet luxury, the idea that true wealth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. Think about the difference between someone who just made money and someone whose family has held wealth for 3 generations. The first person buys the biggest logo, the loudest car, the most diamond-covered watch they can find, because the money is new and the instinct is to prove it's real. The second person? They're wearing a $14,000 cashmere sweater with no logo, driving a car so understated it doesn't attract a second glance. And on their wrist sits a Patek Philippe Calatrava that looks to an untrained eye like it cost $400. That distinction is everything. Old money has always understood something that new money is still learning. Luxury is a language, and the highest form of it is one that only other fluent speakers can hear. The watch isn't for you. It isn't for the crowd. It's for the one person in the room who already knows. If you're finding this fascinating, hit subscribe and stay with us. This kind of story is exactly what this channel lives for. The watches they actually buy. So what does that look like in practice? What are the watches that billionaires are actually wearing, while the rest of us chase stainless steel bracelets and ceramic bezels? The answer starts with Patek Philippe. Always Patek Philippe. The Geneva-based manufacturer has been producing watches since 1839. It has never been publicly traded. It is still owned by the Stern family, and it operates on a principle so unusual it borders on arrogant. Patek does not make watches for you. Patek makes watches for the people who come after you. Their most famous advertisement reads, "You never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation." That philosophy has created some of the most valuable timepieces ever made. The reference 2499, a perpetual calendar chronograph, looks almost painfully boring. A round case, simple dial, small complications, the kind of watch a history professor might wear. A yellow gold example sold for over $2.7 million. A steel version remains one of the most sought-after watches on the planet, with fewer than 350 ever produced. Then there's the Patek 5016, described by collectors as potentially the most complicated wristwatch in history. Minute repeater, tourbillon, perpetual calendar. From the outside, it is a quiet, conservative dress watch that would not look out of place on a senior accountant. Inside, it is centuries of horological mastery compressed into something the size of a coin. These are watches built for people who already won, who have nothing left to prove, who understand that the complication inside the case is the point, not the diamonds on the outside of it. Rolex sits in a slightly different category, but follows the same principle for those who know. Not the modern-day date in yellow gold with a diamond bezel. The vintage references. A 1950s reference 6200 Explorer, a steel 24/7 with a long-gone dial variation. Watches that cost less than a luxury car on their original sale and now trade between serious collectors for sums that would make most people faint. The pattern is consistent. Plain dials, restrained cases, zero decorative flash, maximum internal mastery. Why they hide it now, here's the question that really matters. If you've spent $10 million on a watch, why would you want it to look ordinary? The answer is layered. First, there's security. This sounds almost too practical, but it's real. When you wear a watch that advertises its own price, you become a target. Robberies targeting luxury watches have spiked dramatically in major cities. In London, Paris, and New York, armed robberies specifically targeting Rolex and Audemars Piguet wearers have become disturbingly common. A watch that looks like nothing is a watch nobody steals. Second, there's the social filter. When you wear an obvious status symbol, you attract people who respond to status symbols. That is a very specific type of person, and it is not always the person you want around you. The billionaire who wears a plain-faced Patek knows that the only person who will recognize it is someone who already sits at their level. Everyone else sees a plain watch. The filter sorts the room. Third, and most importantly, there is the quiet power of not needing to explain yourself. Insecurity performs. Security rests. The person who needs to announce their net worth hasn't finished reconciling with it yet. The person who has, they've stopped caring what you think they're worth. Warren Buffett famously wore a modest watch for years before switching to a Rolex given to him by his company. Bill Gates wore a plastic Casio for years, worth perhaps $15. When you have more money than some countries, the watch becomes almost beside the point. Almost. The ones who wear the $11 million Pateks aren't trying to show you anything. They already know. The auction house circuit nobody talks about. Here is where the real market lives. Not in the gleaming showrooms of Geneva or the flagship boutiques on Fifth Avenue. In the auction houses, Phillips, Christie's and Sotheby's run dedicated watch sales several times a year in Geneva, Hong Kong and New York. The catalogs are dense and technical. The bidders are largely anonymous, and the prices for the right pieces, the historically important ones, the ones that look the most ordinary, are staggering. A steel Rolex Daytona reference 6241 with a specific dial configuration called the John Player Special sold for $5.9 million. From the outside, it looks like a moderately stylish vintage sports watch. Nothing that would make someone stop you on the street. That's the entire point of the exercise. The ultra-wealthy have essentially built a parallel luxury economy that operates entirely out of sight of the mainstream market. The pieces they prize are the ones that are invisible to anyone who hasn't done the research. Every $10 million watch sale that happens in this world occurs without a single Instagram post from the buyer, because the buyer doesn't need Instagram to know they bought. Well, what this tells us about wealth itself, wealth today is often performed before it is possessed. Social media turned luxury into theater, cars for thumbnails, penthouses for stories, diamond watches for reels. Yet the truly wealthy left that stage long ago. They moved into a world most people cannot recognize: a plain navy suit, no visible logo, a quiet watch on a leather strap. You may pass such a man in a hotel lobby without noticing him, though he may be worth billions. He notices your indifference and prefers it. That is real quiet luxury, not fashion but confidence. The watch does not need to announce its value. The wearer already knows. Real wealth whispers. Insecurity insists on being heard loudly and repeatedly. If this made you think differently about wealth, about what luxury actually means when the performance is stripped away, subscribe. Because we're only getting started. Because we're only getting started.